Hello and welcome to another reaction video, and this time what I thought we'd be talking about is an interesting article about how age is computed in South Korea, and in more generally talking about assumptions that programmers make when developing code and that are not always correct. And as usual, I have with me Adi. Hi, Adi.
Hello.
So you are in an undisclosed location.
Yes, exactly. And I don't have all the techniques with me, so
Yeah,
it's probably gonna be not that a good sound.
yeah. So we apologize for the quality of the sound, but I think it's good enough. It's not as clear as usual, but we can hear you nice and well. Now, before I go and talk about this, what I'd like to say is that we programmers, we make a lot of assumptions about code, right? And so I've seen many of those. For example, when you run, you write an application and you run it on your own computer. Let's say it's a web-based application, and then you install the application on a server, and the server is in a different time zone than where you were. Right. That's one assumption that I've seen. Another assumption that I've seen is with one of our customers on the unit testing workshop. They were writing code for ships, and here's the trouble with ships. Ships move around the globe and they change time zones. And sometimes they change time zones back and front, because you can basically go over and back on the timelines, right? You can even go on the date line, which means that you go one day, you move back in time, you move to yesterday or you move to tomorrow, right? It's so I think these were the biggest assumptions that I've seen. Have you seen such assumptions made by programmers?
Yes, all the time. And these are probably the most, let's say, not necessarily well known, but they happen quite often with time and date. But there are also others that are more maybe narrow, or you don't see them that often, and they often generate a lot of issues or a lot of problems. Typically, the idea with the assumptions is that you need to make sure that you make an assumption, right? That's first of all the idea. The problems that I see is that we assume that everything is how we think. And we assume that everything is how it's locally. So let's say other assumptions around this are UTF, so language. And this is something I often liked to do. Well, before the pandemic, we used to go to conferences. I know it was a long time ago. And since my name has a special Romanian character, I always like to introduce my name with that letter and see what happens. And probably around more than half, maybe 3/4 of the time, there were some special characters there when they were printing my name badge. So that's an assumption. They assumed that no one will introduce special characters like, well, diacritics, they're not special. I didn't introduce, I don't know what other weird things, like non-printable characters. So this is something very interesting about languages. And also we assume about languages that everyone will read or write from left to right. Because we use English, and that's like the programmer's language. but not everybody. I mean, some write from right to left, from top to bottom. So that's again another thing to take into account if you want to have this type of input. So I think everything that's kind of basic, date, characters, text, things like that, can become surprisingly difficult to tackle when we talk about assumptions.
Yeah, and I found an awesome example this week. It's an article published on firstpost.com. It's called Explained How All of South Korea Might Become a Year Younger. So how do you compute age for a person? Obviously, you take the current year, you divide the year of birth, and you get age, right? That's how we would compute age. Well, that doesn't work in South Korea because when a baby is born, it's considered a year old.
Mhm.
So basically, everybody is zero based, but they are one based. But it's even worse than that because as the year changes on January 1st, the child gains one more year.
Mhm.
So if you are born on 30th of December, let's say, you are 1. And then on January 1st, you are 2. And then, from here, it starts to get more in line with what we are used to. Yeah, so a child born in December is already 2 by January. And they count age based on their birth year and not days.
Mhm.
Right? Because indeed it depends on which month you are born. If you are computing age for somebody, you need to know the exact, traditionally, let's say, or in most countries, you need to know the exact month and date of, and then do a subtraction here. So basically what they had is they have 3 ways to count age.
Okay.
The international counting system has been used for legal and administrative processes since 1962. The other official way of counting age, babies are born at age 0 and gain a year annually on January 1st. So this is different from the previous one.
Mhm.
And the third one is they are 1 at birth and gain another year on January 1st.
It's very interesting.
Right. And now the goal of the article, they are actually looking to simplify this and to move to the international system. But I think it was pretty funny because it's one assumption that I never thought that I was making, that if you compute age, it will be different depending on the country.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an assumption. People think that people look at age in the same way. Okay, another thing maybe related to this is calendars, assumptions. We assume that everyone uses this calendar that we have, but it's not true. We
Yeah.
have also Eastern Europe calendar that parts of Russia, Ukraine, so use, and that means I don't know 10 days difference or something like that. There are Asian calendars, multiple.
Yeah.
Middle East calendars, multiple. Also, I think in South America. So it's not the same calendar. Not everybody uses the same calendar, and the year doesn't start in the same day for everyone.
And actually, if I look at this reminds me of one thing that I keep telling developers that, and I'm telling you very briefly, one will become more.
Yes.
Right. And the example I usually give is if somebody comes to you at the beginning of the developing of a product and tells you, we will only ever use euros as our currency in this application. You can be very certain that at some point in time, somebody will come to you and say, okay, we need a second currency. And that's,
Exactly.
yeah, this is absolutely very common. But in this case, let's assume that you start with the normal way of computing age, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to go into South Korea, and suddenly you have to introduce two more ways of computing age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is strategy pattern, basically, but...
Yeah. So you have more strategies to tackle depending on different inputs.
But absolutely unexpected.
Exactly. So it's absolutely unexpected. You reminded me of another thing that happened in Romania when the government changed the VAT. That was so funny. That was an assumption that because VAT is a tax on consumption that wasn't changed, was extremely stable for 20 years or so. And everybody started building their systems, platforms, and so on. It was, I don't know, like everybody wanted to have their own IT system for everything. And so you started seeing that these numbers, the VAT was hard-coded because programmers thought, oh, it's been like that for 15 years. Who'll change it? And then now suddenly the government says, no, we'll change the VAT. And everybody was shocked. How can you change the VAT? It's all over the code. And I know that companies spend quite a lot of money on tackling this. For a small product that I know, they worked, it was something like a small CRM, they worked two weeks, everybody, just for this, finding the VAT everywhere in the code and putting it as a parameter. And so this is a silly assumption, but yeah, whatever. Because it was in the database queries, in the code, in the backend code, in the front-end code, everywhere.
Yeah, and this is one thing. So I found another law of evolution of software, which is a constant will become a variable, will become a function.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is actually very true for VAT in Romania, because initially it was fundamentally constant. I think it was 18% for a very long time. I don't remember if 18 or 19, something like that.
19.
And then they changed the value. So fundamentally what this means is it becomes a variable, right? Because it's not constant anymore, or it's constant, but it's a different value for the constant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you need to change the constant everywhere.
Yeah, and it became 24, if I remember correctly. But then what they did was they introduced different types of VAT depending on products. So you'd have VAT for books being like 10% and a few other products like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and for, I don't know, basic like bread or something like that, it's 5%. For the rest is 19% or 21%. It depends on the time.
So suddenly you have a lookup table, mm-hmm. which is, well, you could say it's a function or a table. It doesn't really mm-hmm. matter. But once again, it's the same thing. One becomes more. Instead of having one value, you have multiple values. And those values vary depending on time, depending on the product, on different axes. And this is one thing, software requirements change not because some people are very, are watching us and are evil and want to tell us, I saw that you wrote that number in 10 places. Now I want to change the number. It changes because the world changes around you. and the world tends to become more complex, and that's why you have these kinds of variability. So I have this theory that we could identify some laws of software of requirements evolution, basically, and that would inform the way we design software so that it's more changeable in time.
Yeah.
But it's still an assumption at this point.
Another thing that was interesting now, I remember when we were working on generating some documents, and there was this assumption from the first programmers who wrote it that it will be only one page. And they added, I don't know, was something legal or something, and they needed to add a few more legal clauses there, some terms, conditions, and so on. And suddenly you needed to have 2 pages. But the system that was used to generate the PDF could only generate 1 page. So that was really funny.
Yeah.
In a way, it's okay. I mean, you did what you had to do for the moment, and it worked. I mean, I wouldn't say that you should have over-engineered in the beginning to have the most powerful engine, PDF engine, and so on. But it's suddenly unexpected to see that it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, there are many things like that where we expect a certain change maybe, but we don't know in which way we would change. So let's say we do software for Europe, and in Europe we have certain, or let's say we do software for US, because that's maybe an even better example, right? So if you're in US, you don't need Unicode, you can just use ASCII. You don't need what else you don't need? You just need one calendar.
Dollars.
You need the time zones, because there are multiple
Yes.
time zones, of course. You need very little things. The numbers are normal, let's say, and so on. But then it depends where you need to extend this software. If you need to extend it to Europe, okay, suddenly you need Unicode because it's special characters, depending on where you go in Europe, but almost everywhere you'll have special characters in the language.
Yeah.
You need to change the currency formats, date formatting, time zones. All right. Still manageable. One thing that I think many people don't expect or don't think about is internationalization, particularly when you need to translate your application in German.
Yes.
German language has much longer terms. So if you want to design your forms so that they fit on the screen, you need to make more space for the German translation of labels. But okay, that's manageable. But then if you need to move your application to Asia, suddenly you have a much more problems, right? Because look, the computing the age is not the same. Characters are absolutely different. If you are going in Japan, they write from top to bottom. If you are going to China, it's at least left to right. But if you are going to Middle Eastern countries, it's probably right to left. So it becomes already very, very complicated, and before you introduce all the other things. But the thing is, some of these things now are built into our frameworks, our libraries, and so on, and are quite easy to do. But other things are not that easy to do. And you could try to over-engineer and be prepared for everything, but it will just make your application extremely complicated. So instead, the idea is the same, to try to keep on what you know and then whenever a new case comes up, to refactor your code using patterns like strategy or open close principle and things like that. But with this being said, I think it's interesting to see what types of assumptions we can make. And if you don't know, there's a GitHub repository called Awesome Falsehoods, and it's basically falsehoods, a list of articles about falsehoods programmers make about things which are simply untrue. And we've already talked on this channel about time and date, but we can still go a bit. I won't go into all these articles because they are quite long. I invite you to read them because they are very, very interesting. But there are a few things that might be interesting. So falsehoods programmers believe about time and time zones. Every day has 24 hours. Right?
Of course.
Of course. Daylight saving time. Some days can have 23 hours, some days could have 25 hours.
Exactly.
More than that, you have leap seconds.
Yes.
So occasionally,
so if you go into depth, that will be it's very complicated.
So leap seconds, well, it's a bit complicated, but basically because of the way the Earth rotation and revolution doesn't match up perfectly, right? So we have our calendar pretty well structured so that we don't have a lot of problems with this. But occasionally you need to adjust with a few seconds, with 1 second every now and then. And these are called leap seconds. They are announced about 6 months before. And some days have an extra second. Theoretically, this is something I didn't know. Theoretically, there could be negative leap seconds. This haven't happened before, but you don't, maybe they will. Another one, week 1 of a year starts in January every year. Well, not necessarily, because December 28th, 2014 belongs to week 1 of 2015. So you would have, because January 1st was in the same week. So
yeah, exactly.
Which was DST, daylight saving time, always sets the clock back and forth by exactly 1 hour. Well, in Australia, the clocks are advanced by 30 minutes for daylight saving time in Lord Howe. So one place in Australia, not everywhere.
Oh boy. That's complicated. Half an hour differences.
Daylight saving time always starts around spring and continues until fall. These are already very subtle, right? The ones I usually see are much less subtle than that. But we've discussed about those already. In Morocco, in the middle of summer, DST is suspended for a month during Ramadan, depending on which year it is.
Oh, so it's also depending on which year.
Yes.
It becomes very simple.
So, another one. So let's say you want to, I quite love this one. Let's say you want to save a date time in the future. And you save it in UTC, right? Because you expect things to be relatively the same. Well, this assumes that you will have the same time zone rules in the future as you'll have today.
Mhm.
Problem is that time zone rules change. In 2014, we have 10 updates to the time zone rules.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is not to make you over-engineer stuff, right? It's just to realize, on one hand, that time and date are really complex. And second, to know which kinds of assumptions you might make that are wrong, and just to have a better chance of identifying, the possible issues. Daytime combination. 30th March 2014, hour 2:20:42, so during the night, is always valid. In Central European time zones such as Europe Copenhagen, this time does not exist in local time because of DST making the clock speed advance by an hour from 2 to 3. So you don't have any time between 2 and 3 in Copenhagen on that date.
Hmm.
And that's what actually happens in Romania as well, right? We switched
Yes.
from 2 to 3, and I think backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, by the way, this reminds me about time zone rules do not change. There's a movement in EU to remove daylight saving time,
Yes, exactly.
which would mean that you are mentioning people changing VAT. I wonder how many people will have to change their code because DST is removed from EU.
Yeah, but also it happens that different states around the globe change their approach to DST.
Yeah.
And some of them want it, some of them don't. So it's very puzzling. Each year there are a few countries changing their decision.
Yeah. Another one. The time 23:59:60 is always invalid. We already talked about leap seconds. This is actually valid sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is how you have one leap second. You have 23:59:60. Okay, so pretty funny. It's and what I keep telling people is one thing that I've noticed, right, is the most complex parts of code are those where code meets the real life. The reason time and date are so complicated and there are so many problems in code is because they are a human problem. They are not a computer problem, right?
Yeah.
And the same happens with strings, because we have different types of names and so on. So anyway, so I found this quite interesting. And the second one that I like to go through, this is very, very interesting. It's about names. Falsehoods programmers believe about names. So this is from calzumeus.com. And you're talking about your problems with introducing special characters. Let me tell you. Now, this is an older article referred by this. A person, I don't know this person, John Graham Cumming. So this is his name, right? And he was trying to register in, okay, it's an older article, 2010. I hope things have gotten better since then. Tried to register to multiple web products, and the answer is last name contains invalid characters because there's a dash.
Yeah. It happened to me the same with the first name. When I enter both of my first names, then sometimes I have this issue. And it's really weird because legally the name is with a dash, but sometimes when using it for government systems, they tell me I shouldn't use the dash. But legally, I should use the dash because
Yeah, exactly.
that's the law. It's very confusing. Apparently, they don't know their own rules.
And I like what he's saying. There's nothing wrong with my name, just as there's nothing wrong with someone whose first name is Jean-Marie dash,
Yes.
or someone whose last name is O'Reilly.
Hmm.
Of course.
Exactly. Exactly. So there are some names that are not that often, or they're not so used. And typically, when testing this, I always try to come up with unusual names. So okay, we start with I don't know, John Smith, but then we go to names that are more and more difficult and complicated.
Another one is Yahoo. Once again, it was 2010, so I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how Yahoo does it today. Yahoo oddly believes that I don't know how to type my own name and decides to lowercase the C in coming. It's willing to accept the hyphen, but not that I know who I am. So it tries to help by automatically correcting to lowercase
Mm-hmm.
c in Graham dash coming. Yeah, so it's quite funny. I think it's gotten better, but you are correct in um, actually in government systems, in banking systems, there's still this problem.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Exactly.
that my name on credit cards is always not with a dash,
Mm-hmm.
which is how my
No.
full name should be, but they never can have, and they always make a weird combination of my names. I have too
Mm-hmm.
many names, I admit, but they still don't make them quite good.
Also, there is about diacritics in names. Banks don't really like diacritics in names, and also, well, other big organizations, sometimes not even the government. But I know that accidentally I saw that that was a decision from the European Court of Justice for someone somewhere in Europe that wanted his name to be in diacritics in the bank because that's his name, and they approved that. So the bank needs to make sure that his name will be with diacritics.
Oh,
But guess what? Core system banks are typically are very old and they don't use UTF-8.
yeah, they are mainframes. So about,
So how
yeah,
do you do that?
yeah. I know that about, I don't know, 80% of transactions pass through mainframe of financial transactions. So
Mm-hmm.
this means it's very likely that your name will go through an old COBOL code with supported strings of maximum, I don't know, 127 characters and uh, no dashes, no special characters, no.
Yes. But still, the law is that your name should be used accordingly. And there's this decision, and if anyone wants to use this decision as a precedent in Europe, they can.
Mhm.
So that means if I would like to go to, I don't know, a bank and say I'd like my name to be with diacritics, I would create a whole lot of problems. So this could go up really bad in the future years. It's a lot worse than the VAT thing.
This reminds me of something else that I've read for this when preparing for this video. The Linux time will end in 2038.
Mm.
because it stores the number of seconds in 1st of January 1970 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in an int 32, I think. And we will run out by 2038. So
they'll need to make int 64 and
yeah, or
run some more
something.
hundreds of years.
Yeah. Or change the way, because it's a really weird way of doing it.
Exactly.
Anyway, so this is an article, Calzumeus, okay. Patrick Mackenzie is his name. And he says, I have lived in Japan for several years programming in a professional capacity, and I have broken many systems by the simple expedient of being introduced into them. Similarly, I've worked with big freaking enterprises which, by dint of doing business globally, have theoretically designed their systems to allow all names to work in them. I have never seen a computer system which handles name properly, and doubt one exists everywhere, anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he lists a few wrong assumptions about names. And I kind of like these ones. People have exactly one canonical full name.
Mm-hmm.
People have exactly one full name which they go by. You might remember that there are some people who have author, pen names, or,
Yeah.
stage names and stuff like this. Actually, it's quite funny. So, for example, in Hollywood, if you want to register as an actor, I don't know exactly why. I imagine there's something with the syndicates there and so on. But if you want to register as an actor, you have to have a unique name. And this is why many people need to change their names for Hollywood. And they don't change legally their name. Legally, they still have the same name, but they have a stage name for movies as actors.
Very interesting.
People's name, this is a favorite of mine. People's name fit within a certain defined amount of space.
Mm-hmm.
I can never understand why you want to fit names into 100 characters or 256 or...
Because of COBOL, that's why.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I understand. In COBOL there were some limitations, that's fine. But why today still?
Because you use the same idea of how a name should be structured, designed, the field, and you propagate it. This is how we always do things.
Because I know there are, there in your databases there is a storage type for string which is variable. It grows depending on how much it needs.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking now about Spanish names because they tend to put all the ancestors' names there.
Yeah.
So you have legally, I guess, you have Spanish people who have 30, 35, 38 names, and they are legal. So what do you do with that?
Absolutely, yeah. And this, I don't remember if this is here, but that, oh yeah. People have last names, family names, or anything else which is shared by folks recognized as their relatives. So some people don't have only one family name. Some people don't have family names, and so on. So there are people in US who have changed their name to be a single name legally.
Exactly.
So
they can do that there. I think in Europe you cannot, but
yeah. So in US you can change your name to be, I don't know, John. Just an example. Okay.
Yeah.
People's names sometimes have prefixes or suffixes, but you can safely ignore those.
Yeah.
I actually don't know examples for this, but I think some French names are also like that you have a kind of family, like a longer names.
Well, you have the names like von Neumann,
Oh
like
yeah, true.
that start with a particle,
Yeah,
or in France, I don't know, Le Petit, which is again starts with a particle. So I guess
yeah.
also in I think in Netherlands you have the same. So there are these situations. I think these are the prefix names. Or I don't know, Dossi with a D apostrophe or C.
Yeah, that's
So,
correct. Um,
or Spanish, it's like Da Costa.
yeah,
And I also think that there's some Arabic names the same that have some particles that means son of or something like this.
yeah. That's true. Another thing, um, where was this exactly? People's names do not change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in many countries you change your name at marriage,
Mm-hmm.
or a divorce, or you can change your name legally
Mm-hmm.
for various number of reasons. Um, so another thing, people's name change, but only at a certain enumerated set of events that refers to marriage and divorce. But it's not true because you can change your name legally.
Mm-hmm.
You can go,
Exactly.
you can go to a
And
court and say, I want to change my name. These are my reasons.
and I remember that in Slavic countries, you have uh, so the men have a name and the women have the same but with an A at the end. So you have Petrikov, for example, and you have Petrikova. So
Yeah.
always the women's name ends with an A, and it's like even if they're married, so you have the Petrikov family, but then you have Petrikova, who's the woman. So it's starts becoming interesting.
Yeah. Um, people's name are case sensitive, people's name are case insensitive. These two seem to be. So I guess the only way you could have a system that works everywhere is kind of have different algorithms. Um, what else? I think there was another one. People's names are assigned at birth. That's true in many countries, but not everywhere. I remember, for example, so how did they do in some indigenous tribes is that you would get your name by accomplishing something.
Mm-hmm.
So this means that you would get your name because that's what it points to later. So all right, within a year or so, but not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have time to accomplish anything. 5 years? No. Sometimes I think it was around the age of 14 or something like that. So that's when
Yeah,
you are getting the
but it can also happen to change the name again because of something. So you can change your name later because something else happened or you achieved something. So
yeah. I mean, yeah, of course. Once again, based on accomplishments or
mm-hmm.
heroic acts or something like that.
Another very interesting thing that I remembered was about Icelandic names, which is really, really different. So for Icelanders, they don't have any last name, or they have only last name. Okay, I don't know, as you want to put it. And the names are made of uh, one of the two first names, and the patronymic name. So you don't have a last name basically, except for a few people. So they're very different than anything else, and it's very difficult to put them in a category. So for them, it's quite sometimes impossible to put their names in a typical first name, last name form.
And to end this, because I found it quite funny, the Klingon Empire thing was a joke, right? Because he starts by saying that you might need to support, Klingon names or something. And look, depending on what you are doing, you might need to have. Oh yeah, it's here. Right, the Klingon Empire. You actually might need to support Elven names or Klingon names, or because if you are making, let's say, a game platform or a forum for gamers, or you expect that somebody will come up with a name that is Klingon or Elven or Dwarvic or whatever. Another one. I can safely assume that this dictionary of bad words contains no people's names in it. There are people who have names that contain bad words in it.
Yes. Or that could be bad in other languages.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. All right, so, and the article closes by saying this list is by no means exhaustive. If you need examples of real names which disprove any of the above commonly held misconceptions, I will happily introduce you to several. Feel free to add other misconceptions in the comments and refer people to this post the next time they suggest a genius idea like a database table with a first name and last name column. I keep thinking about this, that perhaps it would be easier if we would just have a kind of a long name and short name. Because I understand why you typically what we use the given name for is for addressing in the application, in the emails that you are sending from a product and things like this, right? Because it's more friendly, or it's assumed more friendly to say hi Alex instead of hi Mr. whatever, the full name. But one simple way to do that would be to have a variable length field with a huge length, maximum length. It can be 10,000 characters or something like that. You don't care because it will only store as much as it needs, right? And another one that stores the short name that used to address, in a more friendly way, the person. And that would be, I know it's a bit weird today to think like that, but if you want to do a product for people around the world, that might be a better model than having first name and last name column in your database. That each is 255 characters long precisely.
Yeah, but you'd have then the issue about what's first name, last name, in that only one name, and that's something difficult to correct.
Yeah, but
if you don't have so clear way.
Yeah, and once again, it depends on your target. If you are working with European countries, then most likely you can use first name, last name. No, not much problems there, as long as you support Unicode, UTF-8, and you know.
Hmm.
But well, and honestly, the bigger problem with UTF-8 is that not all fonts support the special characters from UTF-8. It's
Yes,
not
yes,
that they
yes.
do not store the character correctly, but it's not displayed correctly because the fonts do not support it.
Yeah.
That's a different issue. But yeah, but if you're trying to do like products that are used by you know, from US to China to Yemen, Israel, and a bunch of other countries, then you need to think a bit more about these things, right? And so the goal of this was to realize that there are many assumptions that you can make without even realizing. And so how do we deal with this? I'm thinking BDD is a good way of dealing with this, right?
Especially from BDD, the what if part, right?
Yeah.
I think you also need to be analyzing things in a very wide way to try to look out for problems from or situations about these topics. So before really going to a solution, try to understand what could be the weird variations, and I think that's important. Coming up with weird names lists. You could start with that, or with dates, date time, which are weird, or anything like this. And you should ask or search for examples of these situations. I
Yeah.
think that what's weird is that this is a tester mentality more and less of a programmer mentality to find out how it won't work, how it will fail, it will crash. And I think that's why it's kind of difficult.
Yeah, it's I'm thinking one of the common techniques that I used to teach and that I teach at unit testing, test-driven development courses is that you first write those tests that are particularly for test-driven development. You first write those tests for the common examples because you want to get to a working solution.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have something that works, you start adding the paranoid cases. And those depends on how paranoid you are.
Mm-hmm.
And what this means is you start making a bunch of variations. And in case of strings, what can you vary? You can vary the content of the string, add spaces, so punctuation, diacritics, special characters, vary the length of the string, have multi-line strings, single-line strings, add numbers, non-printable characters, maybe, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you introduce all these variations just to, and at this point in time, I don't expect all of these tests to fail and to add a new case, but once in a while I will get a test that fails and gives me a new thing to solve.
Yeah, and also cross-site scripting.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
introduce that in a string. That's always funny.
I was just thinking today because another one here, which we won't go to, another article is falsehoods programmers believe about addresses.
Oh yeah. That's very interesting.
And I was thinking, what would happen if you, let's say you build a building and you name your building semicolon drop database.
This is hacking.
No, it's not. Well,
Yeah.
because you can name your building, right?
How many delivery services will fail, will stop working? How many online shops?
Yeah.
What
All right.
about the post, the postal services?
So search for this thing, James LK awesome dash falsehoods. I will add the links in the I will add the links below in the description. And anything else, Adi, that you'd like to add?
No, no, not much. Just to make sure that always it's more complicated. Always there's a case there. Now it depends on how what's the risk or the importance of looking at all these cases. Maybe it's not, and it's not a big issue. But if you do have something like a system where you need to look at these things, it will take a lot of time, and you need to do it.
All right. So this is it for today. This was a special Orthodox Easter edition because we are recording just before the Orthodox Easter, and well, it's Thursday evening, but it's basically the last working day of the week. We were looking to do something fun, and I hope this was fun for you as well, and you learn maybe a few new things. So pay attention to your assumptions. Always write the code, make it work, and then think about what are some assumptions that we are making. Because you always are making assumptions. And some of those won't matter, but some might matter more than you would like. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to like, share, subscribe, tell other people about these videos, maybe share it, or have a conversation with testers in your organization to find what other things happened that were unexpected. And once again, until next time, remember to think design and work smart.